record. Wonderful. We are now recording. And I can see my screen. If anyone else is still coming, I'll be able to let them in, but we'll go ahead and get started for now. So hello, welcome to our virtual career treks for the fall of 2021. Tonight, we're going to delve into academic librarianship. So I want to thank our three guests, Deanne, Alex, and Alex, for joining us. And I want to thank the students for taking the time to join us as well. It's a regular Zoom room. So as we go through, if you want to send me a chat, I'm happy to ask a question for you, but you can also raise your hand and we can ask questions directly. I have a few questions to get us started. And oh, I thought I could let people into the waiting room and talk, obviously not. And so we're going to go ahead. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to ask our three panelists to introduce themselves, including where they are now and what they do, but also what their path was to academic librarianship. And I just want to make note before we get started that this is a SILS Alumni and Friends event. So we have people who have gone to SILS and people who have gone other places. So we want to make sure that we recognize that. So your questions, it may not be certain SILS teachers jump out at them, but everybody has some library science education to refer to. So with that, we're going to start with Alex Carroll.
Okay, thanks, Lori. So I'm Alex Carroll. I am a SILS graduate from the class of 2013. It's kind of like nails in the chalkboard to say that, to think I started the program 10 years ago now. So my path to academic librarianship, so I'm a science and engineering librarian in Vanderbilt University, currently in Nashville, Tennessee. I've had a couple of stops before then since SILS. I had similar positions at NC State, so I worked with Alex as well over there. And then before I was at NC State, I had a similar position at the University of Maryland, College Park. And kind of my path to academic librarianship, like so many other science librarians that come out of UNC, is through the US EPA program. So I did a graduate assistantship with US EPA and with the NIH campus that's over there as well, over in RTP. And then I also had the chance to work at Duke over at Perkins Library a little bit. So those kind of combined experiences kind of pushed me towards science libraries and academic libraries, and I've been there ever since.
Thank you. Deanne, can you go next?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Deanne Brame. I'm not a SILS grad. I went to North Carolina Central, so right down the street. Kind of like Alex, I I did start out in kind of health sciences libraries, and I was an EPA intern as well. So probably right after Alex was there. Originally, I did not want to be in academic libraries. I was very much against it. I was like, no, that's not what I want to do. And having did all my internships in special libraries, that's really what I was trying to go after. And that's not how it ended up. So currently I work for the they just changed the acronym, Network of the National Library of Medicine, based in Charleston, or for Region 2, based in Charleston at MUSC. So honestly, I kind of get both now, right? So I'm a special librarian and I'm also an academic librarian, in that we're still faculty and we get all those perks there. I've only been there 6 weeks, so can't answer too many questions about that. But before that, I was a digital services and systems librarian at Winthrop. And I kind of got there just because I was looking for something that I could use my background in digital libraries in. And that's kind of how I made the segue into academic libraries.
Thank you. Alex, Valencia, can you also intro yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Lori. My name is Alex Valencia. I'm currently the Student Success Librarian at NC State. I've been in that position for about a year. I started at NC State through their Fellows program where I met Alex Carroll. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. I was brand new, super green, right out of MLIS school. When I was in school at UCLA, I wanted to go into public libraries. That's the whole time I was there, but I did work at the research library as a just research assistant. And then I took a class on academic librarianship, and it kind of opened my eyes to, you still get to work in the community, you have resources, and your community is a little older. I was going to be a young adult librarian. And during my second year, Jason Evans-Groth, who's the digital media librarian at NC State, did a recruitment trip for the fellows program. It was a really cool opportunity. I'd never been on the East Coast or in the South before, so I decided to take it, and I'm still there today. It transferred into the student success position that I hold. So it's nice to meet all of you.
Great, thank you very much. So I have some questions for everyone, and so it doesn't really matter what order we answer them in, but just to kind of keep the conversation flowing. My first question is, what was one of the most helpful parts of your graduate experience? Was it a certain class or a certain experience outside of the classroom?
I'll go. I would say the internships are probably my biggest thing. So since my grad program was kind of structured a little different, we like went at night, right? So you could do all your internships and things during the day. And those kind of connections kind of helped me see outside of the classroom enough to say, yes, I want to work in this type of library, or no, law libraries are not for me, you know? So those are the biggest, that's kind of what I attribute to how like comfortable I am now in some of the situations, is that I did a bunch of internships.
So I would agree with here. I think for me, one of the biggest things that has stuck with me is the connection of creating colleagues. So it's been really helpful to, it was really helpful to meet other students who then could grow into being colleagues throughout your career. So the chance to work with other people was a huge.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Meeting people that were going to so many different fields of librarianship or had ideas of what they wanted to do after libraries really opened my eyes to seeing how much more there was aside from the public library, which I said was my focus at the beginning. It just kind of expanded my horizons, and hearing them talk about what they were into and be excited about it really like encouraged me to try to take the classes like the academic librarianship class and see those opportunities, that there are more opportunities out there. So definitely like my cohort of classmates was just really, really fun. I'm really glad I had that experience.
So the flip side of that question, was there one thing now looking back on your graduate experience that you wish you would have done in graduate school or done differently?
I'll start off. So since my experience is a little different, so I thought about this question, and I didn't really have the whole cohort experience in grad school because it is a program for like working adults or people who can just go. So we're like in class and then boom, you're gone at 9:30. Like there's no sticking around, there's no anything. So it was kind of hard to build that kind of relationship with the people I was in class with. So I only keep in contact right now kind of with like the people I worked with at EPA and the internship. And those are like my connections now. So I wish I would have had more so I could keep up with people in my program.
I think for me, the one thing that I think a lot about in that academic libraries, there's an expectation, right, that you'll get involved in professional development, and for a lot of folks that involves research and scholarship, right? So I think my maybe one regret was not getting a little bit more started on that a little bit more as a graduate student. Thinking back, the one nice thing about SILS is they ask you to do a master's paper, and so that gives you kind of a nice on-ramp to doing that. But I wish I had done a bit more of that as a graduate student. You know, it felt like I was busy with coursework and busy with like internships and stuff. But looking back at it, I think it would have been, I probably didn't do my first poster until right before I graduated because a mentor kind of said, we're doing one. But I think I wish I had done a little bit more with that. I think I've been a little bit more proactive about that.
And then for me, I would have really liked to take advantage of our internship program, but it was so difficult with commute. getting to the school in general, and then focusing on classes, and then, just being at that certain time period. It's just really hard to justify throwing on an internship on top of that. But I think that experience would have been really helpful. And we had such a great internship program to take advantage of. It just wasn't in the cards at the time. And then another thing too, I wish I'd been a little more financially savvy. Just kind of was like, I'm going to pay for everything or get all the loans, do it all now. And then when I get my job, then I'll start worrying about it later. And now, especially now, there's so many programs that actually work with if you're a teacher, if you're in education, you can figure out some type of payment plan. But just being on top of my finances a little bit more is something now that I'm on the second hat, on the backside of it, that I'm definitely wishing I had done while I was in school, for sure.
Thank you. Well, Alex had alluded to professional development, and that was my next question. How important is professional development in your field? And if you're going to say it is important, if you could give us some examples of what things you do.
The short answer, right, is yes. Yeah, and I think that your question is leading us that direction, right? So I think sometimes folks are frustrated with library school because it feels like it doesn't equip them with everything they need to know, right, when they feel like they enter the job field. But I would say that's kind of the case for every graduate professional program, right? And there's, in most institutions, when you hire a new library school graduate, there's an expectation that we're going to support you in developing in your skill set, right? And so there's kind of, for every single person, no matter what job you step into, there's going to be gaps in your own expertise and your own previous learning, and that's okay, right? And I think that's one of the great things about this field is that there are a lot of different opportunities to learn new things, right? So I'll connect to my previous question, right? I said that I wish I had done more kind of research and scholarship earlier in my career. Well, opportunities to do that once you get in the field, right? And you do enough of it, you end up being on the other side of being your now all of a sudden, or your journal editor all of a sudden. So I would say that part of the gig.
So I would say it's not important if you don't want to go anywhere, right? Like if you want to just get there and stay in your position, it is not important. But otherwise it is. And obviously I'm a goofball. So I think when you're looking for positions, like Alex said, make sure you look to see how they're going to support you with professional development if that's something you need to progress forward, right? So my first library did not do that. And as a new librarian, you don't know that you're this is something important that you need, right? So then you may end up getting stuck because now you have to start from the beginning if you ever leave. So make sure you look to see if they're going to support you and how, right? Are they going to give you a stipend for professional development? Is there going to be a mentorship program where they can tell you about tenure and promotion? How much absorb it all? Even if they don't tell you about it, go look for it on their website. That's the number one thing I can say about professional development is don't rely on other people to get you there. You need to start on your own. And these connections that you make with your cohort or anyone you meet in libraries, just, keep an eye out for that because you may end up, doing a paper together or, presenting. It kind of gives you a low stakes thing for you to get something on your resume or CV without it just being all you, because it can be overwhelming at the beginning.
Yeah, I would second that a lot. And some institutions like NC State, they have resources to send you to conferences for professional development. And it's a nice thing to have when you're doing your annual review, but it's not a requirement. And then I've had some job interviews where can you tell us about your presentations? And it's one of the things they ask about right away. Others where they don't even bring it up at all. So just being aware of what the field you want to get into or the colleges you want to get into, what are they looking for? And it's also, so being so fresh out of, it's kind of weird, the process of getting the funds and applying and getting your tickets and then reimbursing your hotel costs. So just encourage you to sit down with someone when you start, and just go over the process with them. Figure out how your system works, so that way you're not coming out of pocket until they can reimburse you at the end of the month, and you're you're just getting your first paychecks and everything like that. So just be aware of what's going on. And if you're aware of the different conferences, like there's so many conferences on all the different types of things, and they're all over the country, all over the world. So you really, if you can schedule them out and you can budget them and they fit within your path, you can go to these really cool places, really cool cities, meet really great folks, and it's just a really fun time. So if you have, like, if you're just given a blanket, you have $1,000, let's say, to go somewhere, make the best of that. Figure, do you know someone that you can stay with, so you can crash on their couch and you don't have to come out of pocket with the hotel fees, and then you can extend that to one more conference. You can get really creative with the ways that you travel around and do library things. And then you meet some folks and you can see them at different conferences. That's always fun to build like your cohort of folks that aren't at your institution. I'd also recommend, once you get into your role and you have stuff to talk about, to present with other folks at different institutions. It's always fun, especially now you can do it over Zoom. So you're not as tied to going to the place, but it's really great to build relationships with folks, even if you just know one of the 4 people in your group, but they know other people and you can kind of connect them all together. I've had people come into the libraries who were new and say, oh, I saw you at this presentation and really appreciated it. And it just gives you that like foot towards a relationship builder, which is always nice. You never know who's watching, you never know who's in the room, and it can help you immensely in the future. And you just get to learn a lot of cool things too. You get to see like a lot of different presentations. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Great. Lots of things that I like to tell students, and it's always fun when that's just exactly what you're saying too. So thank you. Yeah, that was my second part of the question, Deanne, was it sounds like there could be the professional development sponsored by your institution. And do you have any recommendations or advice if you don't have professional development funds from your institution, like how much of your own money you should pay in professional development as a new professional?
I think for me, one of the biggest things, so my institution was not one of them, right? They could care less about professional development, really. Like they're like, you are here. So looking back, I think one of the biggest things was like finding a mentor early on, right? Because there are a lot of people in the library profession who want to help new librarians out. So they may sponsor you to do something. They may like say, oh, you need to apply for this grant to get to this conference. Oh, you need to do this program. Also, again, now that a lot of things are remote, it's kind of easier to justify like, hey, I want to go to this conference because it's either free or not going to cost you the hotel and the flight and all of that. So definitely be on the lookout for those. And then kind of just make your own way. Be picky, right? You don't have to be a part of ALA if you can't afford it, right? Like if you are only doing it to pay for membership and you're not going to be involved, is it worth it when you have to like think about what you're going to be eating at night, or you could go pay for something else. So maybe there's like another organization that may be better for you. So if you're a librarian of color, you might want to join like one of those organizations that's not necessarily associated with ALA. Now that I'm technically a medical librarian, the Medical Librarian Association is, the one I should join, not necessarily ALA. So be picky with your money. Just because somebody's like, oh, this is where you should be, do your research and make sure it's going to benefit you before you do that.
And one thing I'll note too, since I'm thinking about Deanne's position, is that there are more better free kind of professional development than I think there's ever been before. And so for me, I work a lot in the interface of kind of science and health sciences. So NNLM, where Deanne works, does amazing trainings right through the different regions, through the national training offices, which are better a lot of times than paid workshops if being on in person, right? So I think that's a great way to being more kind of efficient in your professional development is finding kind of free trainings that are going to be just as good as something you might have paid, $300 to register for and then $500 to fly to.
Alex, one of the few silver linings of the pandemic, right, is that people stepped up and made a lot more available online. So I think that's great. I'm loving the interconnectedness between our three panelists tonight. That was, I'm sure, part of it is who you know and who got asked to be part of the panel, but I love it that there's so much overlap. I do want to remind our student participants that this is the time where you can feel free to start asking questions. I'm going to keep going through my list too, but I feel like I've warmed them up enough for you that this is, if you have something that you want to ask, please feel free to, you could chat direct me and I'm happy to share it out loud, or you could put it out to everyone, or you can raise your hand and go off mute. We're very flexible here. So I'll ask one more question as people may be typing or thinking. And so I'd love to ask each of you what your opinion is on how intentional students who are trying to get their first position at a library school should be. I get a lot of comments from students about they don't want to bother people. They don't want to necessarily come across that they're in their face. And I am always telling them that people would, be happy to chat with them, informational interview and that kind of thing. So please correct me if I'm wrong and you don't want to be bothered by new professionals who find you and want to chat, or if that's a thing that you're okay with.
I mean, I sometimes don't want to be bothered, but don't listen to that at all. It's just what day you catch me on. I think you should bother people. I think it's important. We're librarians, so research is important. Like, we want to do that information seeking they talk about in grad school. So do your information seeking, shadow people, ask them what they do on their day-to-day basis, ask them what their experiences are with a certain institution. When you're doing that, you're also finding like, maybe that's not the best library for me. I know it's tempting to just take the first library job you get. That's not always the best bet for you. So bother people. And if they don't respond, bother someone else, right? Go on LinkedIn, message people, do all those things. Somebody will be there to help you.
Yeah, I think that's a great skill to develop too, because once you're in the job, you're going to be reaching out to colleagues, professors, and professors definitely are not the most responsive. And so, but librarians are, so you have a better shot with librarians. I think, especially, we all remember what it was like to be in grad school. So if you find someone who's in a position that you think you're interested in, definitely reach out to them. There, of course, there's good times in the academic year, in the summertime, after the initial wave of the fall semester. Maybe winter break, those are all good times of the academic year to reach out to somebody. And if someone doesn't get back to you, I wouldn't take it personal. Just try the next person that's on your list and keep it moving. But I agree with Deanne, like shadowing, being able to reach out, grabbing coffee, grabbing tea, super beneficial. And don't worry about bothering anybody.
Yeah, I agree. And then I think the other thing I would say, right, is that all of us are at least a little vain, right? So if you make it seem like you've looked the person up and you found a specific thing about their career path that you find interesting, all of us get flattered by that, right? So you say that you found some paper that you read. You didn't really read the paper all that closely, but you said you did. That that is always the key to all of our hearts, right? So take advantage of that, right? And then the other thing I'll say, right, is when you do talk to somebody, if somebody makes time to talk to you on the phone or to shoot you an email back, just make sure to shoot them an email back again, thanking them for the time, right? I always remember the folks that I get a message back from where they asked me about, a place I had worked previously. I write them a nice message back. And if they, thank me for that, I can always remember the folks that have thanked me for the time. So that's it. Take advantage of the fact that we all like to feel expressions of gratitude. We're all a little vain, all that kind of stuff. We'd always love to hear from people.
To add to that, I just went, since I'm new at this current job, the thank you notes actually help us, right, in promotion and tenure. So definitely send those thank you notes at the after the fact so that we have something to put in our portfolios.
Great point.
I have
Question.
I have a sort of question that jumps onto that point, which is, I've been feeling in higher education, there's this huge trend toward adjunct labor. And I wonder if you sitting in academic librarians see a similar sort of phenomenon in the library, or that it's harder to have stability in the workplace, or tenure track positions work out long term, or what the trends are like from the research center, I guess.
I haven't seen, adjunct librarians so much. There may be like depending on the institution, right? Especially with the pandemic, there is a move towards, we're not hiring. So my previous library had stopped hiring. They were not doing so well in this. And the trend in higher education is that there's going to be a gap soon, right? Like there's not going to be enough students or humans to go to college. And so that's definitely going to impact the way hiring is in the next 10 years, even in the next 5. So yeah, there'll be some areas where there aren't places for people, but I think there's also, there's a lot of spaces where there's people who are just going to be like, I can't do this anymore and leave. Depending on what area of librarianship you are in, definitely moving from like a traditional academic library to being in health sciences, it's a totally different vibe from everything. And they seem like they have more stuff going on than like, they're not as worried, but that's probably just my perception. And Alex can speak to that.
So I guess what I would say is that for libraries that are for academic libraries, I think that are being successful and well positioning themselves, a lot of them, what they're doing is realigning their staff positions to kind of align with institutional priorities. So I think what you see a lot of institutions is you see positions like, say, Alex's, right, which are emphasizing student success, right? So maybe traditionally that FTE position would have been for a single humanities disciplinary liaison position. But there's a lot of a sense that, we really need to invest the library's resources and the staff, the biggest library has in terms of expenditures, to be aligned with what institutions. So at any state institution like Alex is at, that means making sure students succeed when they get to school, they stay at NC State, they graduate on time and all that kind of stuff. So, so I think that's what I see a lot of, is kind of realigning staff to meet the institution.
We had another question come in about how.
I need to speak for you, Alex, in that regard.
No, that aligns with our experiences. We're not tenured at NC State. We're faculty, but there's no tenure track. But in terms of professors, I know it has been tough to fill the gaps when it comes to professors. Yeah.
Thank you. We had another question that came in that said, how do you transfer skills that you have learned in a special library setting to an academic library job interview? Any comments on how to do that well?
So I think once you realize they're not that different, you're way better off, right? So my particular experience with that is, so my concentration was in digital libraries. So obviously I went for like an archives job first, because that's where, that's the easy opening, right? To try to find it. Luckily, I did not get that job, like, whew, dodged a bullet there. But that same institution called me back for another job where I was like managing, they had just started an institutional repository and they needed someone to get it off the ground. So that worked better. And so those experiences I had, like working at EPA, because we worked in like a bunch of different like rotations, working at the Biotechnology Center, all those skills are transferable. Like you can go anywhere. And honestly, like right now, I went from like managing a repository and doing like other tech stuff to working for NNLM. And though they are not the same, I'm still like a technology person, but it's a little different. So if you have questions about how they transfer, just reach out to someone. but most of the time it's not dissimilar, right? Like I think you can make an easy jump over to any other type of librarianship with the same basic core skills.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The only thing I would add to that is if you say you're interested in more of a public services type position, right? So you're interested more in being a liaison librarian or working in kind of functional areas like digital scholarship or student success or something like that. The only thing you might want to think about is some of the things you wouldn't see in a special library. So things like student learning outcomes, thinking about how syllabi and how courses are organized with the registrar, just thinking about strategies for how you would talk about, I've got these skills, how would you find places? You would look for courses that are taught in this area, those kinds of things. Those aren't impossible things to learn, right? The information retrieval, the working with others, that's the hard thing. Those other skills will transfer over. Doing them for you to figure out what's their registrar's website called, or those kinds of things.
Yeah, like Alex and Deanne were saying, you can transfer any skills that you've done on your library projects in school and adapt them to the library that you're applying for. Always look at the required qualifications and make sure you have a story or an instance for each one of those that you can talk about in your interview. For me, a lot of my projects in school were for the public library. But before I went in for the NC State interview, I just kind of adapted them. This is how it would work for an older age group. And these are the information literacy skills that they would take away from this workshop, as opposed to like community building that I initially planned them out for. Now it's more about information literacy, research. What are they getting in these areas? And those are tangible across the board. So definitely look, I always put each bullet point of a job classification, and then make sure I have something that I can talk about for each one of those points. And you can transfer and mold. And then libraries are still and always going to ask the assessment question. So just remember that as well. How can you assess the programs, workshops, sessions that you're doing, instructions afterwards, and so you can improve on them later.
This next question ties in a little bit in terms of not necessarily transferable skills, but with so many different types of academic libraries, did you explore multiple settings, or if not, how did you narrow down your interest? I know, Deanne, you mentioned you thought archives at first, and then luckily that pivoted. So any other thoughts?
I think the main thing is you're adaptable, because a lot of times what you think you want to do may not be it because you haven't tried it. So I went to like a smaller college first, and so it still gave me that special library feel a little bit. Now I'm at like a really big one, and it's a little bit different. So one, just be adaptable. I think you're allowed to make mistakes. It's not the end all be all of jobs. I just went through a job hunt, so I feel you, like it's hard out here. And I've been doing this for 7 years. So just be patient. Don't, again, ask people questions. Ask your friends what they think of you, because like Alex put in the chat, anecdotes are really good, and they're going to remember stuff you don't remember about yourself. And they're going to have really good stories for you. So ask people you've worked with and your colleagues about things. And I don't think you'll have any kind of problem with finding where you'll be or land, or making a space, even if it's somewhere you don't think you'll be.
Pivoting to a question about, as a new professional, or even if you've had a prior past and now a new role, what are some things that helped you figure out kind of the hierarchy of who did what in your organization, or who you could reach out to, or what things you were responsible for? And everyone talks about being collaborative, but I guess other people don't want to make sure that it's like, what is yours and what is that you should be reaching out to?
That is an amazing question. and I'm not 100% sure how to answer it, but I will reiterate what you are saying. It took me 2 years to really understand how our library works and like who to talk to get things done. And if I did something, do I need to check in with somebody before I send out the final product? Because I'm gonna send it out and they're gonna say, hey, you can't do that until we, get our eyes on it, external relations. But also, sorry, where was I going? I just got stuck in a loophole of external relations. Oh, and then after you learn how your library works, you're gonna have to work on the whole university as a whole. And NC State is super big, but it's also really siloed. They're trying to be more integrated, but it's still really siloed. So, you got your people in engineering, you got your people in humanities, you got your people in education. You got your campus community centers, you have DASA, the student organizations. So just really trying to get like a big organizational picture after you've kind of figured out your library, I think is really important and very valuable when you're starting your job. I think in my fellowship is kind of considered like early career. So they were more lenient with the time and able to like meet people and take them out to tea. But yeah, I'd say try to meet as many people, and one person will tie you to 4 other people that are in the building. It's a good skill to be aware of in the beginning, because I didn't even realize until it was like, oh, now I have my folks and my relationships, but those take time to build.
I think that's right. I have.
Alex, we lost you. Could you maybe lose your video and see? We'll see if Alex comes back.
Well, I'll chime in while he's getting together. Okay, so I remember the question. So I think one, since I'm going through this right now, right? Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Again, do your research. You're going to mess up, so it's okay. One thing I really like that our library director did, she sent us like a list of like expectations and things like our first day. That's not something you get all the time. And honestly, some of my colleagues and I were going to go work on some like onboarding research, because we're like, this is a lot and everyone's experiences are really different. So we're going to try to look into that. But don't be afraid to ask the questions, and you're going to mess up. So in her statement to us, she was like, you're going to mess up and it's okay. And I think that allowed us a lot of freedom. I'm still learning. Like I said, I've been there 6 weeks and I'm learning a new university, but I'm also learning a national network of people, and your mind is going to be blown, and just accept that and lean into it a little bit. But like Alex said, go ask people questions, offer to take them out or have them take you out. People are really nice your first few weeks. So take advantage of that. And I don't just ask them the easy questions, ask them the hard questions also, right? So do you think the university is struggling, or like, how are they positioned to be in the next 5 years? What's something maybe you don't like about the library? What's something that could be fixed, right? Don't just ask the warm fuzzies, like try to really drill down to things that like will impact you later once the new job feel has worn off.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the one thing I would say is that all of these institutions are they've got some similarities and commonalities, right? Universities are all organized departmentally. And then as Alex said, you've also got research centers and student centers that kind of work independently, but they're also all their own thing, right? And so when you come to a new job, you kind of have to do all that stuff all over again. And as I was saying, there's unfortunately really no shortcut to it. And so sometimes it feels like everyone knows something you don't know. And so sometimes you just have to kind of embrace that kind of discomfort of like knowing that there's stuff below the surface that you don't kind of understand, and just kind of resolve yourself to the fact that over time you're going to get it.
Those are all great points. We had another question in the chat about if you had the opportunity to pick up a skill that seems to be in demand. I know, Alex, you had mentioned assessments not going anywhere. Any other things that you think would well position people? I know in earlier conversations, we've talked about DEI initiatives and how that might be, you know, that's not going away, and how important that is to know what your thoughts on that are. But have you noticed a demand for particular experiences or skills in academic library settings?
Go ahead, Alex.
I was just gonna bring up your point that it seems like a lot of librarianship that I've seen is focusing on retention and getting these students successfully and engaged throughout their career. Throughout our library, special collections, learning spaces and services, we're hiring these student engagement, student success librarians. Some are more focused on open education resources. Some are, you know, new student orientation. Some are special collections, but they're kind of broad, and you're serving as a liaison for the rest of the school to the libraries. So I might not be able to help a particular class, but if I'm the front-facing person and if I've been out there, they know who I am, I can connect them to somebody in research engagement who's going to be able to better help them with their class and kind of be that bridge. I've been seeing a lot of those positions pop up. And then data and viz is really big right now. And I don't think I think there's going to be so many jobs in data and visualization. So if you have some of those programs or have an interest in that, you can get those little certificates from LinkedIn Learning and just have that if that's where you want to go. And then DEI for sure.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the easy answer here is, Alex said, is the data science broadly defined. I think yeah. And to Alex's point, I think broadly defined, supporting the whole student. So the student success that's talked about in terms of undergraduates, and then another one that we work with graduate students a lot. We think about what we call the hidden curriculum. So addressing things that you don't learn in the classroom, but that are important for succeeding. So how to work with your mentor, kind of the kinds of how to present something well, how to deal with conflict among a research group, all those kinds of things.
I would also, I think all of those. I feel like I've been outside of academic libraries for a little bit, but it hasn't really been that long. But I think one of the biggest things I noticed before I left like a more traditional setting is that, yeah, we're looking for people who can come up with ideas to help with retention, right? So be creative in like the processes and things. Like if you're more in tune to what students want, you probably want to speak up at this point, right? Like you probably want to at least try to have a voice when you get there, because we are entering to a phase where they're going to be fighting for students, right, all over the place. So definitely try to do that. DEI initiatives are, again, not going to go anywhere, but just be careful with those, especially if you are a person of color. Like those can be really draining on you, and you might be really enthusiastic about it now, but it's also like a job you have to do every day. You can't turn it off. So be careful. Technology, it's always going to be there. So learn something. I'm a technology librarian and I don't really have formal training in it, but training in technology. And then one thing I noticed, like metadata, right? Metadata and cataloging. Not a lot of people who want to do that, but there are a lot of metadata and cataloging jobs open. So if that's your cup of tea, please go forth and do that. And if you, yeah, just go do it.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say, right, is metadata is a data science skill too, right? Like so much of how libraries actually support researchers, we talk about research really is helping them think about data, help to design spreadsheets. So metadata doesn't always sound like a breaking edge skill, but it's a really important one to have.
Alex, do you mind repeating what you said? It kind of went in and out, and it was really good about metadata being fundamental skill of data science and how libraries operate.
I'll try one more time. Yeah, I'll try one more time. So it is a core thing of what our research data services are, right? So a lot of when we support researchers, it's helping them design a README, which a lot of times is metadata, right? So a lot of times data science sounds like some kind of fancy bleeding edge thing, but a lot of times it really is about having good structured metadata. So don't let people talk down about metadata. It's important.
Love it. Let's not bash metadata. It's out there to stay, and we need people who can do it. Yes, sometimes the buzzwords, sometimes I think job descriptions are a great example of buzzwords. It's like, oh, what are the latest things we're supposed to be working on? And let's pack it into a paragraph to share with students and how we can separate that out. What does that really mean? So I want to make sure if people have any other questions, we probably have one more round for questions before we wrap up tonight. I think we've gone through most of the ones that came through in the chat. So is there anything else that people wanted to? This has been really very helpful. So I really appreciate the panelists being so open with their feedback.
Can I say something as questions come in? When you're thinking about jobs, plan like 6 months in advance. Start looking, November of your last year into June, because academic librarianship, when it comes to hiring, moves super slow. And especially now during the pandemic, I applied for a job in August and heard back, and you just kind of forgot about it, heard back from them 2 weeks ago. And it's hard. You're what you want to be able to live your life, and it's really frustrating. I went to undergrad for business, and they would shudder at that. You're losing good people. You want to be able to hire people really quick when they're good people, but bureaucracy, and they have to go through the process. They got to get their search committees together. It is a lot to go through the hiring, so it's it is what it is. But just plan for it taking a while, even if you're the best candidate and you fill all the boxes. It's just going to take some time. So plan super far in advance. And there's nothing better than going into your last months of grad school and knowing that you have a job waiting for you right when you graduate. So don't feel bad if you're, as long as you're on path to graduate when they're ready to hire, you'll be set to go. So definitely look early as possible. And it can be frustrating, and don't give up. And if you don't hear back from a month, that's just apparently normal practice. So.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big one. And be prepared for that long interview. That's something no one told me about, how long interviews are for academic library jobs. Was not prepared for the full day at all. And it makes for a really long day. And can seem intimidating at the beginning, but you're just meeting a bunch of people. And even if you're an introvert like me, you will survive.
That's very important to remember, both things, that it's not necessarily that you're not a good fit just because it's taken so long for them to get back to you, and that unfortunately, even if it's not your cup of tea to sit through a day worth of interviews, everybody wants a piece of you that day, so they're not going to shortcut any of those meetings. So someone asked in the chat, Deanne, did you just have your recent hire from Zoom interviews, or were they in person?
So both. So the initial screening was through Zoom, and then the next one was on campus for like a day and a half, and they actually said they cut it short. It's usually 2 days. And I was like, thank you. But before that, I've been applying for jobs. Like Alex said, I've been applying jobs for quite a while before that, and just, not hearing back, or with all the things changing and hiring. But yeah, so I did a mixture of both this time.
Thank you.
I think one thing I'd add is, while the long interview seems daunting, further along you get in your career, the more it starts to feel like you are glad it's that long. I think I lost you again. I'll put it in the text.
No, we heard you.
Okay, all right.
Great.
Because it starts to be right that when you start to think about uprooting, say, your career, or uprooting, especially if you have a family, you start to be really grateful that you get to meet so many people, right? When you have you want to meet all these people who you're going to be working with, right? And also, I think the other thing from the hiring side that the long interview shows is it shows that they're serious about you as a candidate, right? They wouldn't invite you to, they want you to get a real sense of what it's like to work here, what this is like as a place, what we are like as people. So I think the long interviews, when you first do them, seem kind of daunting, but you do, and maybe this is just like me coping with it, you do come to appreciate them the further along you get your career. At least I have, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about you don't want to bait and switch, right? You don't want to meet somebody really fun and friendly and innovative, and then that's not who you spend the majority of your time with. So it's better to meet as many people as possible.
Right, and always go in with questions, always. And watch people's body language and everything. Like your discernment is better once you go through like the process or you've been at your first job. But if you already have kind of that discernment now, if there's a red flag and it's like pinging, like acknowledge that at the beginning, you know, like don't just take it because it's like good. If something doesn't feel right, it's probably for a reason.
I've also heard that you should probably ask the same question in multiple groups to just compare answers to see if that helps you in terms of getting good information. Oh, thanks, Alex, for throwing good questions up in the chat. Well, I want to take the time to thank our 3 panelists for spending this time with us tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you for being so open with your answers and for helping our students. So we really appreciate this. This recording will be put up on our SILS site for students who weren't able to come tonight, who I know wanted to be here. So thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. And if you ever want to like bother any of us, I'm sure we'd all be more than happy to hear from you.
Yes, that is something I wanted to ask. If people wanted your contact information, is that okay for me to share?